having some book talk, I guess. Right? Any questions so far about what we have been doing, if you remember what we have been doing? Once a month, very susah lah. And this is not a topic that you read regularly, especially when you don't have to take exams. If not, then I just say what I intend to do is, I think I quickly rush through a few slides of Spinoza to give us the assurance that we're progressing and not stuck with Descartes. And by the time I hope I remember where I normally tell myself I'll make a mark, but I didn't bring my pen, didn't make a mark. So what I hope to do is to finish Spinoza today and then do as much as we can about Leibniz. And then once we're done with Leibniz, we should go to Immanuel Kant. But before Immanuel Kant, I'll just mention one very short portion on David Hume, because David Hume is the arch philosophical enemy of Christianity, a critic, so to say, and he was the one who woke Kant from his dogmatic slumber. That's the word used. So that's my plan. Kant, I think it should be very important. And I think as of now, you may be wondering why all this discussion on substance and essence and what has that got to do with Christianity. I think there's one book which I will recommend, The Best of All Possible Worlds, Story of Philosophers, God and Evil by Stephen Nadler, which basically has a very interesting narrative about how Spinoza, Antoine Arnaud, A-R-N-A-L, was about one of the most brilliant guy in France in those days. And France was number one in the world for 2 centuries. And Leibniz dealt with issues of God, his action in the world, his providence. So behind all this abstraction, which I have stopped, I mean, it's a 2-hour lecture, 1-hour lecture, I can only deal with the general principles, but they all lay the groundwork for the very serious discussion on the nature of God and his interaction with the world. So, and they lay the foundation for our philosophical discussion, and this is what we call the early modern world. So just if you are interested, the best of all possible worlds, I pass around. I want to introduce to another set of books, Leibniz, A Guide for the Perplexed. This whole series of books deal with the whole series of books, which A Guide to the Perplexed is introductory text to the major philosophers. I think these are pretty expensive books now. I bought them cheap years ago lah. I used to be a good friend with a distributor, and she would give me 60% discount. Wow, where you can get that? And that was before, when the ringgit wasn't so poor. It was
a guide to
Guide for the Perplexed, Franklin Perkins. So I'll pass this book around.
Careful.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. If I move, is the mic the suffer? Not me. Oh, your camera. Oh, okay. In Men from La Mancha, if the stone hit the pitcher, whether it's the stone fault or the pitcher's fault, is the pitcher will suffer. Okay. So it's your camera, not me. Okay, so there are 2 kinds of textbook. One kind of textbook will introduce you to the nice packaging, class notes, those like students who take exam will be very happy with those kind of textbook. There's another kind of textbook which actually engages you with the thinking process, and it's a bit more messy in terms of preparation for exam, but I think Guide for the Perplexed is one of those simpler, not textbook, but book that tries to help you understand the concepts that are crucial for the discussion. So that's what happened. Okay. Now back to Spinoza then. So you pass them around and see how it works. In Spinoza, as I mentioned quickly, 17th century Jew, Spanish Jew, living in Amsterdam, excommunicated for abominable heresies. Came from Portugal, I think, his parents, because the Christians were persecuting the Jews in Spain, and Spain and Portugal were one nation in those days. Okay, the Jews were always seen to be, anti-Semitism was always there, lah. So bright fellow, and sometimes you're too bright, your community can't handle you, and all your bright ideas so was excommunicated for abominable heresy. So after a while, he lived quietly as a lens grinder. Part of his mystique was that he rejected worldly recognition and pleasure just to live a simple life, and as a lens grinder, and turned down the offer of professorship from the king. In those days, you need the king's approval to get for that kind of position, and died from lung disease because of all the lens dust. So I think that is part of his mystique. But apart from that, he was the first to systematically challenge the status quo. He is the fountainhead of all your critical biblical studies, the book Theological Political Treatise, which is totally different format from his ethics. When you read the ethics, it's like reading in the old days when you read mathematics, you have different theorems and proof and corollary or lemma. So when you read Spinoza, is that you don't read from cover to cover. You pick a problem, you want to work through it, you just work through it, and then you have satisfaction. Here is a very rigorous thinker, you may want to say. So essentially, he also, you may say, broke with the general worldview of the day, in that while theism was unquestionable, here is this guy whose philosophy essentially refused to accept the distinction between God and creation. Theism would mean God is above creation. God created the world. But to him, God and nature are the same. So in what way same? Is he the same as, when you read him, it sounds a bit like the Hindu philosophers. But on the other hand, God is not exactly equivalent to nature, although God is the whole of nature. So there is while traditionally the word pantheist was used to describe him, panentheist would really be a better description of his position, meaning that God is not reduced to the world, but God works fully through the world. Okay, and if God is within the world, there's no need for revelation, because religious, and because all you need, given that we are part of God, in principle, we can understand God. So why need revelation? And of course, revelation, as far as Spinoza is concerned, all the books are just mythology. That's how he began all these critical studies of the Bible. But also, I think, if that's the case, the religious literature is not so much to convey information about God, as they are works that are ideological texts to unify the community. So that's what it is, you may want to say. But so you would say, so religious language is not descriptive but instrumental and binds the community. So in the end, but nobody doubts that despite having rejected the traditional will of God, or believing in God, I mean, does he believe in God? It's a quick question. If God is nature, nature is God, what is left of God? So he will be perceived to be an atheist in disguise, you may want to say. But his commitment to right virtuous virtue is without question. So in a way, to him, he was a kind of humanist. If you have already excluded God, what's left is human. So you have humanism without supernaturalist theology. Now, talk about religious language. If you listen carefully to Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza, behind their discourse is an assumption that religious language correctly reflects the reality that that they're referred to. There is a correspondence between language and reality. You may call this a correspondence theory of knowledge. In contrast to the 20th century, you have the correspondence theory of knowledge, you have the coherence theory of knowledge. To some extent, Leibniz would be a coherence theory of truth. Yes, okay. We put neat categories and assume we can dichotomize them, but actually they are overlaps. Then, of course, up to the 20th century, Charles Peirce, P-E-I-R-C-E, would argue for pragmatic theory of language. William James, what it's meaningless to talk about all. After Kant, how much can you really talk about the correspondence theory of knowledge if we don't really know the world out there? So what is the cash value of your language and philosophy? Is the word William James would say. Okay, so that's got a pragmatic. And then, of course, back in the 20th century, language is just a game. Okay, and there's no reference. It's all within your discourse, internally defined, and forever chasing the real meaning. Okay. So anyway, behind in the early modern philosophy, the assumption was there, and that was that there is a correspondence between what language purport to describe and the reality they're referring to. Okay, so what was the motivation for? I have to go quickly for Spinoza. I think just as same thing with Descartes, the recognition that there was a loss of religious certainty. Because with the rise of modern science, the traditional paradigm of knowledge, Aristotelian knowledge, no longer can convince. Why does opium makes me sleepy? Because it contains some sleepy sleep making property. Does it explain anything? It doesn't explain anything. Okay, so this is Samuel Taylor Coleridge famous description, I think, of the kind of philosophy that they're talking about. So with the abandonment of the traditional worldview, there's a loss of certainty, and so there was a fresh, like Descartes, remove all tradition and then build afresh. But if you want to build afresh, you have to recognize what knowledge you are pursuing. So you recognize there are improper knowledge and proper knowledge, and so as usual, the same category. Okay, people still purport to know knowledge, but this is just opinions which depend on hearsays. A better, you may say, a more reliable form of knowledge then would be reasoning, and reason is what you deduce based on premises being foundational truth, which you assume, you do not question, because they seem to be self-evident. What you intuit, intuition, not a woman's intuition, but what you know by direct cognition. So so basically the way Spinoza structured his ethics would be, there is always the definition. His definitions are not arbitrary. His definitions is based on a certain intuition of what are self-evident. And based on this, which functions axiomatically, axioms, again, if I may, describe assumptions in mathematics which are taken to be true without proof, intuitive. And that is considered certain. And so from there you build a whole body of knowledge of propositions, proof, inferences, and so on. So that's how is his style. In all my years of reading all the debates of philosophy of religion, I mean, in journals, you find nowadays journals, philosophy is not your text. There are a lot of symbolic language and steps in argument. You would have thought, the assumption being that when you make all your arguments and you lay them out in steps, there ought to be agreement about you're logically correct. I can't challenge your logic. But then you will find in the course of the discussion, the other person say, oh, but then you see they will introduce another additional relevant fact which apparently has not been adequately covered by your premises. So after a while, then you realize that at least to me, all the logical steps, arguments actually hide the assumptions they are making. And assumptions have always been kept bare because it's supposed to be modern syllogistic argument, logic, is pares down all those unnecessary words to its essentials, and then you provide the connections called deductions. Then do you have your unquestionable proof conclusion. They never come to agreement. All these clever philosophers, they don't come to agreement. I mean, all you need to do is to read all these serious journal of philosophy. Why? Because they all work with different axioms, different assumptions. But it's never specified because they're all supposed to be philosophers who deal only with the bare arguments. So after a while you realize that impressive, but we always say, I can't challenge your logic. Your logic is correct, but your premises are wrong. So when you have so you always challenge like that, you see. So this, I don't question. Sometimes they do question the logic because you have subsidiary arguments. They introduce in other assumptions. So, but anyway, just to say that. So at one level you read Spinoza. That's what you get. Okay. So this is going very fast. So now you got to begin somewhere, and so in a sense, for Spinoza, he would begin his whole philosophical enterprise from ground level. What is the foundation of knowledge? Foundation knowledge is what sustains all the rest. What sustains all the rest? Actually, it's God lah. But you use the word God, you don't sound very professional. And as a philosopher, you don't use that yet. So you say, since we all come from the Aristotelian tradition, Platonic tradition, which differentiate between the unchanging world of essence on the one side and the changing world of materials and the properties and accidents, which I think we have done before. So let's deal with the substance. Okay, the foundation of the whole enterprise of knowledge is really what they are after. So for Spinoza, I gave you some handouts to give earlier to give an idea how rigorously his argumentation go, but for us we will just keep it simple. Okay, so he begins with his definition. Definition is axiomatic. Definition is your intuition. So he says here, by substance I mean that which is in itself and is conceived through itself, that is, that the conception of which does not require the conception of another thing from which it has to be formed. Now you know why people don't study philosophy. But you look at it carefully. It is very rigorously defined. That which is in itself. So the whole emphasis is on this independent, and it's conceived through itself. Even its conception does not rely on reference to another. So the conception of which does not require the conception of another. Otherwise, how do I mean, we say, I think therefore I am. Then in the 20th century, say, I think therefore we are. To emphasize our community. I think therefore we are. All kinds of things. I think therefore go shopping or whatever. So, if in order to understand your concept must be self-sufficient, internal, and self-sustaining, you may want to say. It's conceived through itself. If you have another, if your definition is clear, if it's contrast with